My name is Andrei Tremaine. I was born right here in Hollywood. I'm 96 years old now. I am one of the 3 generations of ballet dancers. Yes, you heard the word ballet. Ballet for men? Yes. This thing called war. I have to go, I have to go. I think I have 2 themes. The reason I say that is to keep the interest going for anyone who may want to take the time to view this film. And that theme is, one is adventure. Yes, my life has been adventure. And the other is that interesting and strange word called legacy. I looked up the word and I thought, no, that's not good. Then someone told me one time, you're a legend. And I said, a legend? Well, at least I'm a walking legend. There's something better than a legend. That just sits there, but I looked it up on Wikipedia. Legend is something to do with old stories and some myth. Probably both of those things fit with what I'm about to say for these few minutes here. The adventure is where my life began. And it began in a little city called Point Richmond, up near the San Francisco area. There's Richmond, then right by the water, San Francisco Bay, is Point Richmond. I was living with my grandmother because my mother, who was a famous ballerina with the Basile Ballet Russe. The original Ballet Russe was run by a person, René Blum. And then it became de Basile. His name was Colonel de Basile. That was, all the dancers from there eventually became a new company which started in Monte Carlo, called the Ballet Russe. Russian ballet is what that means, of Monte Carlo, Russian ballet of Monte Carlo. And so that is what it was. She was with that one company for quite a long time. That's why I was raised by my grandmother so much up in this little small city of Point Richmond, because my mother was on tour. She was home for a little while. And so she was teaching class in Point Richmond. I was 6 years old, and she said, come to class. I said, me? A ballet with all those girls? No, 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 no. She said, you just come with me. You do it. And so she was pretty strong in a way, so I had to do it. And so I went to the class. There were no other guys there, not a one, all girls. I took the class as best I could. My eyes were roaming all the time with the girls, more than them. And afterwards she said, what do you think? Do you like it? I said, like what? I said, she said, ballet. I said, well, let me ask you this. I said, Mom, is it like this all the time? I was the only guy there, and there's all those girls. Is that the way it is? If so, I'm going to come back. And I'm interested. She says, well, I can arrange that. But in any case, that's how the whole thing called ballet started. I did go and continue classes. And I continued on until we eventually moved down to this area in Santa Monica. I'm a Santa Monica boy. My mother had remarried. Now, I'll go back just a little bit. My mother was divorced from my father. I never really knew my father. But I have a sister, and she's made a pretty well-known actress in Hollywood. Her name was Yvonne Carlo, and she also wanted to be a ballet dancer more than anything else, anything. And so she was studying dance and studying whatever it took. She was in British Columbia at the time. My father left us. I never knew him. I think he left when I was like 3 months old. So my mother had a handful, that's for sure. So Yvonne Carlo came down here to Hollywood because she thought, if I can't make it up in British Columbia, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to make it in Hollywood. And so, yes, she did. She made a lot of films, quite well known. The ones with C.B. DeMille was one of the better films that she made, and at least in my estimation. So here we go. She's down here. I'm moving along in classes, and I'm getting now to junior high school, which is in Santa Monica. Then I move on with my very good friend, and I'll mention his name. He was a pal, Don Sherman, because he wanted to do everything I did. And in a few seconds from now, almost, I'm going to get into why I'm mentioning his name. He's connected. He's very much connected. We were the kind of guys that we go out on dates, and there was only one reason we'd go, girls. We go to the thing called Ocean Park Pier or Venice, I forget which, the fun house. It was dark in there, all kinds of little rooms that you go through and everything. And we'd try to find a place where the girls would come, you know. How do you do? Here's a couple of guys. You know. Anyway, that was our life. He was very good at electronics. And that's where the connection is going to come up shortly. We're now in high school, Santa Monica High School. Samo High, it was called. He was with me all the time in everything we did. We're beach boys. We went to the surfing. We used to do the body surfing. Okay, the adventure's beginning to get a little bit more where it's understandable now. Because my mother, my very wise mother, saw in the Santa Monica Outlook an ad for what was called a electronics and electrician for a movie director's new little theater in Santa Monica. It was on San Vicente Boulevard and 26th Street, a very small little theater. His name, very famous name, James Whale. Now, James Whale made Frankenstein, the movies, The Bride of Frankenstein. He even made regular movies. One, I think it was 1933, 34, Showboat, one of the first Showboats. And he did other films as well. Now, what the ad said, I need an electrician to set up all of my lights. And my mother said, you do it. I said, I don't know a thing about electrician. Nothing. But my friend Don does. I got to thinking. She said, you grab him, you get him, and you go over and you take the job. I went over. I met James Whale, a very wonderful man, British, very cultured, very much understanding of everything about the theater. And she said, this is why I'm sending you there. You got to learn the theater. Do you know what a proscenium is? I said, no, I don't. What's the apron? What? What apron? So you learn. This is, if you're going to be a ballet dancer, and that's going to be your theme, and that is one of the themes of this chat, then you learn the theater. You don't just learn your ballet steps from your teacher. You got to know what the stage is. Do you know what a proscenium is, you know? So I learned, and I learned a lot. Now, I got in there, and I couldn't do a thing about the electrical part. But my friend Don came in like a ghost when Mr. Whale wasn't there. And he set up all the lights, hooked them up, well out of business. I put my screwdriver one time into the thing, and the thing blew up. And he said, you just sit down. I'm going to do the whole thing. So I took the credit, but he did all the work. Anyway, that's how it all started with James Whale, with me. I would be invited to his home, which was on Amalfi Drive in the Pacific Palisades, a beautiful home, beautiful pool. I'd be working for him. He lost his driver. He had a gorgeous, big Buick town car or something. And he said, would you mind being the driver for me? I have to go to the studios and so forth, and while you're working at my theater. I said, certainly, of course I will, Mr. Whale. So one day, he said, I have to go talk to this man, this actor. His name is Pratt. I says, Mr. Pratt, okay, yes, I will drive you, sir. So we went down to Hollywood, into this beautiful home. He parked. He says, come inside. I'm going to be a while. We're going over the script and things. So I went in. He opened the door, and here was Boris Karloff. That's his real name, Pratt. And oh my God, he was something. Here I am talking to Frankenstein, and me, this guy trying to learn things. Here I'm in the home. And so he said, oh, please sit down, and I'm going to bring some tea out. So I said, fine, thank you, sir. It just choked me up just to even think about it. And so here I was sitting here, and they were going over their script, and then pretty soon the maid in the other room said, the tea is ready, sir. And he himself brought out the tea and served me tea. So here's the story, and that one, which some people have heard, I was served tea by Frankenstein. At least I looked at it that way. Now here he was, 4 feet from me, sitting in a chair, and James was there, and they talked over the whole script of The Bride of Frankenstein, which was made after the original Frankenstein, with great actors and actresses. And I could listen to all this. Before even one camera was rolling, I was listening to the script. And so all of that took about an hour. And here I'm sitting there with Mr. Whale, this great director, and him. Okay, the end of that story. Now, then the director said, I'm going to be having to move my theater down to Hollywood Boulevard area. It's called the Las Palmas Theater. It's a little bigger because the other one was only about a 70 seat. This will be 120 seat or something like that. So we did. We moved down there. So once again, my friend Don Sherman came in, set up all the lights. By that time, I learned something about it, and I said, okay, I'll help you with whatever I could. And we got all the lights all set up. Big actresses were there. Gary Cooper and you name it were in. And he had a lot of British people, actresses and actors that he was so fond of. And James Mason was one. And he was British. Philip Merivale and Gladys Cooper. All of these names everybody knew at that time. So there I am again, learning the theater, listening to that. There was an actor called Philip Dorn at that time. He was Dutch. And he says, now, Andrei, you must make a special light coming from above. And he's going to be standing behind a podium and talking about the Netherlands and the war, and his war, World War II, was ominous. And I said, what? World War II, was something they were preparing for, they thought. And he did. He spoke, and I put the light on. We got a special light, what they call a special. Came right above him, right on down on top of it. And you could see it. And his beautiful speech about that. Now that led on to what was happening to the world at that time. 1941, the Pearl Harbor that brought us into the war. When I heard about it, I was at my home early morning in Santa Monica. I was in the garage. I was always in the garage trying to fix my car or something. So, and I had the radio on, a little radio out there. And suddenly it was interrupted that Pearl Harbor was being bombed. The gentleman in the next door was outside, and I said, "Sir, it's awful, but it sounds like they're saying that Pearl Harbor in Hawaii is being bombed." And he ran inside, and yes, it was. But I didn't think it's going to affect me. I was 17 years old at the time, and yet it did, because there was a draft interrupting my career. That's one of my themes now. I was moving along real well with great teachers. My mother was my first ballet teacher. Michael Panayev was going to be my second one, another dancer from the Ballet Russe, Monte Carlo, and on and on. But then the draft, and I said to my mother, "What do they mean by draft? Was that going to affect me? If you're going to be 18, she said, yes. She said, you know what you have to do? You have to go, you don't want to join the Army. I said, no, I love the water. Join the Navy. So she took me downtown Santa Monica to where they were recruiting, and I signed up for the U.S. Navy, not thinking about anything else except I'd be on a big ship, at least in the water. Better than crawling around in the mud or something is what my thoughts were. So here it comes to the fact that Don, too, my good friend, had to join the Navy. See, he joined with me. He got onto what they call a DD, that's a destroyer, DE, a destroyer escort, a smaller ship than a DD, which is the bigger destroyer. I was put into an area of thought where I said, if I have to be in the Navy, then I want to do something that at least that brings me closer to the water, where I can have some control. And so first, I had no control because I was sent down to San Diego to boot camp, and that was rough. I didn't like the way they were talking to me. They were not very nice, those gentlemen. And here I came out of it, a nice warm home and everything, and had to take the train all the way down there all by myself to San Diego. And there I was, a kid, 17, getting ready to be put into harm's way, probably. This thought stayed with me all the way through. This is ruining my career. This is not what I expected whatsoever. I've prepared a long way. I'm ready now. I'm ready to start accepting good companies of ballet that want male dancers. And I said, how can I do this? How can I keep my work up? And so I would sneak into what they call the bathrooms of the Navy, and try to do a little, what we call a bar. A bar means you hold on to a bar. There's no bar to hold on to in the bathroom. And do some exercises balletically. And pretty soon they start coming and say, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just doing some exercises. They said, well, they look so funny. You're all turned out. I said, well, we have to turn out for these kind of exercises, but not knowing that they didn't know, but ballet is what it's called, turned out. You're turned out from the hips. Everything's that way. But that didn't work out too well. I just couldn't keep it up. They were making fun of me doing ballet in the Navy bathrooms and wherever I could do it. So my career was really put on hold. I then said to myself, if I'm going to do this thing, if I have to do this thing called war, then I'll do it as much in my favor if I can do it, We were sent then from San Diego to Coronado, an island. It was just a plain, flat sand at that time. We're talking like 1944 now. Okay, I joined in 1944, the Navy. And that was where what they call the amphibious. I never heard of the word, which means land and sea. What's that got to do with the Navy? Land and sea, you know? And so I couldn't stand, I hate to say this again, the way the commanders were talking to me. They were yelling, they were screaming, coming up to my face, and you're this and that, you're nothing, you're scum, you know. Can't you learn how to drive a boat? They had a boat called, it was titled LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. It was a boat about 40-some feet long, and it carried 38 Marines or whatever you wanted in there, or a Jeep. That's the vehicle or personnel. I said, if I can get onto this area, I can get out of Coronado. If I can get into a draft or something that's taking me to where I can learn how to drive one of these boats. Sure enough, on the board, there was a draft because nobody wanted to do it. It was too dangerous. You're driving people, you're going to land on the beach. You know, they're going to be shooting at you or something like that. I said, I can't stand this anymore. I got to get out of here. So I joined the amphibious. That's the adventure. That's part of the theme, the excitement that I'm trying to talk about. Then we were sent a little further north, Camp Pendleton, a Marine base. It's a little bit south of here, Los Angeles. That's where we were learning day by day, night by night, to drive these LCVPs onto the beach and learn how to manipulate them. When you go in, the waves are with you. Yeah. But what about when you back up? It'll swing the boat around. You're taught an interesting feature that never did I think about. You don't pull it back and reverse straight back. For 2 seconds, you turn it to the left, 2 seconds more to the right, and that gives you enough room. And then you pull back full steam and swing around and get out of there real quick. When you drive on the beach, if you go too far in, you're going to get stuck. All kinds of details that I paid attention to, and I'm so glad I did, because it came in quite handy in the future, very near future. I was there for about 3 months learning how to really get this thing down, how to drive these. And I says, I'm going to have to drive in soldiers or Marines or whatever to a beach somewhere. That's what I'm preparing for. All right, it was time to get out of there and get going into this thing called war. We were sent up to San Francisco area, to Treasure Island. That's what it was called because that's where they had the great big, I forget what it's called there one time. And it's an island right in the middle of the regular bridge. Comes across from one side of it there to the other side. And it's an island. You go down the hill in a little bit, and a small little island. And that, we stayed there for a while and continued to practice this thing called beaching. And then came a big PA ship. That's a big ship that takes you somewhere, wherever we're going to go. And nobody knew where. But I said, okay, I have to go, I have to go. That's what I've been preparing for. And I said, I want to get this over with. I want to get back at my career. I want to get home. I'll do what they tell me to do because I'm now trained to do it. And there was a lot of empathy, a lot of fright, you might even say, and thinking, what was this going to really be like? So we docked, or got on the dock and got ready to go on these big ships. And you could see our boats being pulled up on the side, and they hooked onto the side of this big ship. We got going. I went under the Golden Gate Bridge. And my friend, as we were standing next to the railing and looking up at the bridge, and he said to me, hey, friend, I don't know if I'll ever get back from this. And I said, well, I know, but I am. I'm going to. I just said to myself, That's my theme. I'm going to get back. I'm going to do what I want to do in life, really, in my real life. We continued on, and we went directly to Hawaii. And that was the area that all of the ships were beginning to come together with as a group, armada, as was even called, to go wherever we were going to go from there. So we were there for two months and still training and knowing what kind of personnel are going to be on our ships. And LCVP has two, right behind the driver, which is to the left, there's a big, two holes in the back, like this wide. And that's where the machine gunners go. There are two of them, 30 caliber machine guns, and two gunners. Then there is somebody who pulls the winch down to let the ramp down for the soldiers or Marines to get out. I didn't have that. They didn't. They ran out of these things. I had one gunner that was going to be assigned to me, and that was it. So we went from there, when we did finally leave, down towards the Philippines. And that was we passed Marshall Islands and all of those areas. I remember that because people say, oh, there's the Marshall Islands. And then we made the first invasion, a small island. This is my first experience at real war. A little island called Guiwan, which was north of one of the big islands, Leyte. Yeah, north of Leyte in the Philippines. And so here I am carrying in they're Marines. It carries 38 Marines capacity. We go in, we do the invasion. It's not that bad, it's bad. And they're shooting at you and all of that type of thing, but we made the invasion. And I said, well, I'll go back to my ship. He says, no, here's a 30 caliber rifle. This is the amphibious. You're going to be on land now. I said, I don't remember that part. And nobody talked to me about that part too much. And so he didn't say where on the land. You just make yourself wherever you can be. The Marines are going to be in, and they're going to be going all over and trying to get the Japanese. And so I went ashore, and I stayed ashore for about 2 weeks. Now, this was a real dense island of all kinds of foliage and trees and jungle. So what do you do at night? They give you guard duty. And it was pouring down rain one night. And just before that was a clear day, and it was right on the beach. And I used to do body surfing. Oh boy, yeah, big me. Santa Monica body surfing. You got to wait for the wave and get on there and do a certain position and go in with the waves. So one of the other guys there went out and got onto the waves. We were all watching him. It was quite far out. It was about 100 yards out. The waves are breaking. We didn't realize it was coming down onto the coral. He was killed. Our job was to walk around after the next day and try to find his body. I pretended I was walking around. I didn't want to find his body. But anyway, they found it, and they put it in a tent, and it began to pour down rain. Here he was in the tent, and there was a flap that would open up, and you'd see him. And I was on guard duty, and they said, "No, you got to walk about 100 yards down and back." And I said, "Okay," but I didn't do it. I didn't, because the Japanese were around in there. I didn't want to be walking. Why should I walk? I'll just stand still. But what happened is that night you could just see this flap open, and you could see the body. And that was my first experience at death, so to speak. Leaving the Philippines, we left in a huge armada, none of us knowing where we were going. I was on a very interesting ship called the LSD, Landing Ship Dock. Now, what's the dock part? Very interesting. For some reason, these architects at that time where the back end of this particular ship would be dropped down, and the boats that are inside the back part of this ship, our little boats, our LCVPs, and a little bit bigger ones, could float out. Then they'd close it up and they'd drain the water. And that's where we were on. We were on this kind of ship, and we were sailing now back on a northerly basis, not knowing where we were going. It was a long trip, though, because we're in the Philippines, and we were now going to the southern part of Japan, called the WWII Islands, namely Okinawa. I never heard of it. None of us ever heard of it. It took quite a while. I mean, there were many, must have been 400 at least ships all going at one time. This was going to be something big. That's all we knew. But we were well trained, as I tried to go over in my little chat. We were ready to do whatever we had to do, whether we liked it or not, and we're not going to like it, but we were going to do it. We got closer to, we were getting through the intercom from the captain of the ship. We're now 100 miles from the southern part of Japan. There's a whole series of small islands and bigger islands that drop down from the very southern part of the main island of Japan. One of the furthest ones is a bigger island called Okinawa. That was the destination. That was going to be where this armada was going to be used as an invasion force to bring this war hopefully closer to a finish. And so our jobs were what? We're going to have to drive, in my case, Marines, 38 of them, young men, into the beach and go from there under very unpleasant conditions. It came on a beautiful Easter morning day, April the 1st. Sun was shining. We all got up at 3 a.m. Nobody could eat anything because we were all so antsy about what had to be done. We had some coffee, though. And we went over, we got our briefing, what we were to do. I was to be in the second wave of the invasion of Okinawa, my group. It came to be 4:30. I heard machine guns going on up above. You can hear the metal shake when they're going on as we're driving, getting closer to the invasion area. Now, the news of the time mentioned that the main invasion force, they called it that anyway, didn't meet that much in the way of resistance. That was in an area called Naha. It's a city called Naha Harbor. It's a big, round, beautiful, you call it a harbor, I guess. But we were in the Red Beach, which was to the north of that, and then there was a southern beach, which was the Brown Beach. We had resistance. The whole idea was, apparently, the general of the Japanese at the time on Okinawa said, well, let them come in a ways, and then we're going to get at them in the main force. Well, we had a main force going on where we were, and another one down here. We met a lot of resistance. So it came time, the Marines started climbing down. Our boats were right against the main ship, and Marines were climbing down on some of the, what they call Amtraks, different type of ships, type of boats. But our boat just floated right on out with the Marines already in it. I had only one gunner. His job also was to the winch, to the right side. The coxswain, which was my position, was on the left side standing up above everything so you could see. The Marines are in a lower. To my immediate right was this big gray Marine diesel engine. To the immediate right of that, on the starboard side, the right side of the boat, was the winch that let down the ramp. Who was going to do it? It's supposed to be a crew. You're supposed to be assigned a crew of 4. The captain, so to speak, was a coxswain. Somebody to work the winch and get it back up again. There was an engineer and a gunner or 2. We had only 1 gunner on my right side. I'm standing here about 4 feet back from me. On my right side was the 1 gunner. It was time to go. It was 5 a.m. The sun was already up. It was beautiful, beautiful day. A waste of everything, just a waste. I could just feel it. The first wave has already gone in, and it was time, and they were beginning to come back. They got hit very badly. Now the second wave, us. First you make a circle of your boats before you go into a straight line and go straight on into your beaching. So we finished the circle, and we got the cue to go straight on in, and we were passing all the other boats that made it coming back, and we came in. I was about 100 or 200 yards before hitting the beach when everything came at us, all the mortars and everything. 17-year-old kid, experience. I never thought I would have to go through. My gunner was shooting. Thank God, I knew him so well. His name was Pittman, a wonderful boy, a nice Mormon boy, very Christian boy. And he was doing the best he could with this .30 caliber gun to get us in. I beached it. Just before I beached it, though, 50 yards coming in, a mortar hit just to the south, to the right side, about 20 feet, I'll go by feet, from our boat, right on the backside. It got him, it killed him. A piece of his shoulder, I think, or part of his skull came back and hit me, so I got blood all over my body. And I still was trained, and I paid attention so well. I had to do what I had to do to get these Marines in. So I had to reach over as best I could and get the ramp down. It's a winch, and it usually takes 2 people. Here was this hot engine. I was laying on it, getting finally got it down. The Marines went out. The first young man went out, was killed. So his body was there. They had to walk all over this terrible scene and run to whatever they had to do. And still the guns were coming in. Still, everything was a mess. It was awful. And then what do I do now? I have to get the winch to get back up. You can't leave the front end of this boat, which is a big metal flat area that just comes down as a ramp. You have to get it up, or the water will come in your boat. So I have to do it again, crank it. I don't know, it is human strength. I don't know where I got the strength. I got it up. But here was my friend, hunched over his gun. I mean, just slumped. It looked like part of the gun and him were like one. Part of his skull was missing back here, and a piece of his left shoulder. And my training kicked in again. Remember now, you're going to back up. The waves are coming in. Remember, go left a little bit, 2 seconds, then right a little bit, 2 seconds, then go straight back, and then swing like hell around and get out of there. I did it. I got out of there. But still, this young man, when he was laying on the ramp, when he came up, so when he came up, his body fell back onto where the Marines were in my boat at one time before they left. And now he was laying there dead. And my gunner was dead. And I had to get out of there. And so I swung and I got out of there real fast. When I got back to the mothership, pulled up against the side of it, and I was just sick inside. I pulled up to the side because I couldn't go in like this. My boat was damaged. There were big pieces of shrapnel everywhere. Somebody came down the rope ladder onto my boat and took a picture of me. I had my shirt off. I have this picture. I took it off because it was so full of blood, and I tore it off and threw it in the water. And I had my dark glasses on because that's what you needed, was so much brightness. And there's that one picture of me coming from this awful routine, this awful thing that happened, and sitting there. I don't know why they took a picture, but they did. Now, the gunner, the gun, how are we going to get him up? They had to get a pulley thing down with a rope, attach it to the gun itself, because he was so wrapped around that they had, oh, what a terrible sight to have to see him being pulled up with a gun onto the ship above, onto the deck above. And that was it. Then I was able to finally take a break and go on deck, and just, I couldn't believe what I had just been through. It was like a dream. Somehow as a kid, you go through it. You know, you're 17 years old and you've been so focused on doing it, you did it. Okay, it's done. So they gave me a half hour, and what did they do? They sent me back because I had to pick up the dead and the wounded. So I went back, no gunner, no nothing, just a new boat. No time for any of that, because they needed to get the casualties back. And I went in, I got the casualties, and I brought them back. It was calming down a little bit, so I made it back. Then I was free to go. We made it through the invasion of Okinawa. After they began to secure Okinawa more with the Marines and the Army together, was very bad casualties. There were two more islands that had to be invaded, small islands called Aishima and Kumashima. They're north of Okinawa, about 100 miles. We did them. We did them both. We had to stay on land too. And one interesting thing, one night we were right on the water, and there was a bank. Then you come down to a little beach, a little bit of a beach, and then there's a water. We had a pup tent. At night is an interesting feature that the Japanese somehow had done. They trained certain large cats to be able to come in, and if they could get in ahead of them, then they could come in and slit your throat or whatever they're going to do. I happened to open up my pup tent a little bit one night, and here was this cat coming in, big, and I made a big noise, and it scared the cat, and so the guy who was coming behind him ran away. But if I hadn't woken up, I mean, things like that, you know, it doesn't make your stay very pleasant. But we made those two invasions, and that was it. Now, how to get home? The war was now beginning to wind down in that sense. They were doing other invasions and small, but we were told we were going to be prepared, whether we liked it or not, after all of this, to invade the main island of Japan. And we all knew that if that's the case, we wouldn't have made it. We wouldn't have made it. There was too much going to be coming in at us. And that's when they did the Hiroshima bombing and things like that, which brought the war to an end in the Pacific. My stepfather at the time was able to get me home on a medical thing from him. Some problem he had, which brought me home in a draft that was earlier. I got home, San Pedro. I was going to be discharged. I went through the physical of discharge. I went into the last office, and they said, "Is there anything else the Navy can do for you?" And I said, "No, I just want to go home." "Thank you for your service." So I said, "Okay." I didn't have a car. My mother was busy working on something. I'd take a bus all the way back to Los Angeles, where my parents were. I began my career again. James Whale again entered my life and as a guide of thoughts and wonderful things. But then I went over to his home one more time, and we had a lunch. We sat by his beautiful pool he had made, and that was the last time I saw him. He committed suicide by drowning himself in his own pool. He had medical problems. He says, I don't want to go into this anymore. Every night I can't sleep. I'm so sorry. I just have to do this. And that was the last I ever saw of him, which was sad. I now got very busy building up my career. Through the GI Bill, I was able to get lessons without cost with one of the finest teachers in the world, Bronislava Nijinsky, the sister of the legendary, and there's that word legend, Václav Nijinsky. And that is, he was the biggest name in the world of ballet at the time. She was one of the biggest names as a teacher. This was in Los Angeles, like on La Brea near Wilshire Boulevard. There was a studio there. I went there, I took my classes. I was so amazed, all these big name dancers were there. And I went again into my thoughts and what my mother said I must do. Choose your goal and never cease until it happens. I wanted to be with one of the biggest companies there ever was, the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. There were two main companies traveling and touring in the United States. Another was called Ballet Theater. It now is called American Ballet Theater. It's still in existence. And then there's a Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. We toured so many cities, 58 cities a year. That's a lot of cities. Lots of stories. Well, yeah, we were going up into Wyoming in the cold snow, and cold snow, of course cold snow, and rain and whatever. And we travel always by train. We put 3 cars attached to a main train. We always had those 3 cars for personnel and for baggage and scenery and that type of thing. And here we were going up a steep hill up into the mountains of Wyoming or something. We're going to Denver, I guess it was, or something, or that's Colorado. But we were going somewhere. I can't remember the city. And it began to slow down. And we were all watching, and we were watching the snow. And then we heard screech, 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 screech. The wheels were spinning on ice. Now, our big ballerina had gone to the ladies' room. And she was in there screaming and yelling, let me out, because the door somehow, when it started to go backwards, this whole train, because it was, the ice, this wouldn't work. There was metal wheels. And it locked her door, somehow it jammed her door, and she was yelling, let me out, let me out. This great ballerina, Danilova. I'm stuck in the ladies' john. So finally it stopped. And we had to just stay there and wait until it was cleared off, the ice or something, or they got out and did something, but we finally made it through there. I can just say this. Yes, the men had it very tough, of course. So did the girls. So did the girls. They had it very tough. Cold, and what do you have to put on your feet? What is called toe shoes. Very tight shoes made to bring you up higher where you walk on your toes, and they're made just for that purpose. They put lamb's wool in the bottom where you don't feel the floor so much. But what happens when you're on the train and you're traveling, it's cold in the train, and you go onto the stage and your dressing room is cold, and they got to go in and do Swan Lake or beautiful ballet like that, and their feet are frozen, and they can't even get their shoes on, and things like that, and that the men don't have to do. But it's a very hard life for both. But the rewards are there too, and that's what keeps things going. Otherwise, nobody would do it. You know, if it was just an audience that wouldn't care. But they do care, and they show it, and they applaud. And your efforts are being paid at that time for what you felt was very hard work, and really was hard work. And there are many, many stories like that. So there was a place, a city called Normal, Illinois. It wasn't very normal. And they didn't have a stage. So this is in the summertime now on the tour. So they built a stage in the park. No, but with plywood, no support, or no main support, and not a very thick plywood. So when you walk across it, you can, you step on plywood, it would be moving. We're doing a ballet, which at the finale required everybody to be moving. And it goes back to the story where the soldiers, when they crossed the bridge, would break their cadence. So they wouldn't be the same step, which could bring down the bridge. And so here we're doing the same step at the very end of this particular ballet. And yes, it's moving, it's getting big like this, and the audience is going like this, And yes, it is. It collapsed. It was only like 4 feet and down into sawdust. Nobody got hurt, but all you could see was toe shoes sticking up and all the feet and this type of thing. And that was, and then you saw the dancers get up back onto what was left of the stage and try to finish things out, which they couldn't do. You couldn't do it at all. But that was one of the many, many stories. I was able to first, before that though, through one of the teachers there, Elena Wortova, she got me a job with the Paris Opera Ballet. It was only one season. It was about 2.5, 3 months in a summer season. So I got more experience. The most fantastic, the opera house in Paris. Maybe whoever's watching this video has ever been there. It's just so beautiful. And after that finished, then I was able to get arrangements through somebody else that I knew, another Russian gentleman friend, dancer, to be in Buenos Aires, the Cologne Theater there. And I was there for 3 months, one season again. Then I came back and joined the Mexico City Ballet at their beautiful theater that they have there. I was there for quite a while, 6 months at that point. And I've mentioned to my friends that it was difficult getting into the rigor of those things because of the elevation, being around 7,000 feet up or so. It's hard on the breathing. Now, what is this thing called ballet? It's an art form started from Italy with the Medicis, taken then from to France, and from France to Russia, and eventually the Western world got it. Why a man to do ballet? Well, first of all, the girls can't lift themselves, and you've never seen a girl lifting a man. It's a very rigorous, very difficult job, but the excitement, the adventure, there's that word again, begins when you get the applause. But after all of the work and sweat, and I mean sweat, that you do in preparation for putting on a performance, and you hear this audience, wow, and so you keep going. That's what drives you. We played every state every year that we performed, except one state every year. We played South Dakota, but never North Dakota. I don't know why. Maybe it's just too cold, nothing going on up there. Just Buffalo or something like that roaming around. But that was it. And we played usually in the main cities. But Sergei Denim, who was the director of the Ballet Russe Monte Carlo, loved to play smaller cities too, because a ballet theater never played the smaller cities. We performed a lot in Canada, the Ballet Russe. We went above border. We played all the way up across Montreal and Quebec and Ottawa and British Columbia. The thing I didn't like about the stages, though, in Canada, they were what they call raked. Raked is a slant. And a slant is no good for pirouettes. Pirouettes are turns you got to do, and you better be straight But if you're at a slant, you know, it's a slight slant, but it's enough that you're used to flat. It's no pleasure. And that all came from King Louis XIV, because he was a little guy, and he said, "I'm not going to move. You make the stages come down. I always sit in the first row, so I can see. So you slant the stage down a little bit." So they slanted all the stages down, in France particularly. So Canada we played, Mexico we played, Buenos Aires. We went into the European areas of France, Netherlands, where else? Germany, and Spain. And I think that was it. These wonderful theaters, wonderful cities, wonderful stages, new everything, new dressing rooms, a new stage, new audience, foreign audience. And the universal part was they loved the repertoire. We had a very large repertoire at the Ballet Russe Monte Carlo, very large. And that was and a lot of shorter ballets and funny ballets where they could attest to. And I think that was good that we did. We had more in our repertoire than ballet theater. I reached some very good positions with the Ballet Russe Monte Carlo. I was able to dance with great ballerinas like Alexandra Danilova, one of the greatest choreographers, Elena Wortova, which everybody in ballet knows that name. He did Gaieté Parisienne, big ballets like that. He was a hard Russian worker that worked you so much. He had a way of auditioning people that was very strange. Like, for example, he came to the Chicago Opera House, and he would sit in a little chair way at the end of the hall, big hall, rehearsal hall, and he said, "You just walk towards me, and then walk back." And that was the audition. He knew how, I don't know, what they could do just by that. And that was the way he filled up his ballets. Oleg Tupin, another Russian. He was one that had an indirect way of getting me also into the Ballet Russe, although it was my teacher, Najinska, that actually got my audition. But one time they were playing before I was with the company, and he invited me to the Hollywood Bowl. We were playing the Hollywood Bowl, and so I could see the company. So we were sitting there at night, and they started this ballet. And it was so beautiful. And I said, this is the company I've got to be with. I've got to be with this company. And that was it. Oleg Tupin was his name. Now, Frederick Franklin was a director. He was a British gentleman. He was a wonderful man. He had all of it up here. The ballet has no way of being put into except for videos now. They have a thing called labanocation, Laban, his name was Laban, but it's so complicated in writing it down. All the choreography has to be either by remembering it or in video taping it or whatever. And Frederick Franklin could remember all of these things, and that's how much I learned. I learned from him. A lot of the dancers would just take a break, and I'd be watching other rehearsals to learn those parts. So I learned so many ballets, the complete Swan Lake up here, the complete Nutcracker up here, just like Frederick Franklin. Wonderful, friendly gentleman, and he lived in New York. And one time when we were on tour, when he was a young man, he danced with a very famous musical star and singer called Miss Stan Getz. Miss Stan Getz was a big name at the time. And she was appearing where we were in one of the cities in Canada. And so he said, what I'm going to do is surprise her. I used to dance with her a little bit when I was a young man in England, but I've never seen her since. That was quite a while. So here she was performing at this hotel, a big, beautiful, in Quebec, Canada, I forget the name of the hotel, but gorgeous. And we were at the table, and Freddie was at the table. We called him Freddie Franklin. And she began to sing. And suddenly the announcer said, "There's somebody here that knows you, Mr. Gent." She couldn't believe. And Freddie got up and went over to her. They hugged, and they started to dance together like they used to. Miss Tanguette. Probably none of us have ever heard of this name, but I have. But she was there. So things like that. He was a wonderful man, a very good director, very easy to work with, and we were very fortunate to have him. I would say I was finally in the goal that I wanted to achieve since I was a little boy. 6 years old, looking at the girls in class. Now I see what ballet is. All I saw then was the girls. But, there were girls in the ballet Russe, and I'm still looking. But anyway, I can't find any words to describe how it is if you were to have such a great composer as Igor Stravinsky to come and play his greatest, to me, his great Firebird, one of his greatest pieces. And you look down on the stage where he is conducting. Here's this little guy in the pit with his vodka bottle, a shot. It was a shot just like this. And he would sip on that to begin with. But then, when it was time for the finale, he'd drop, and then he would just conduct that beautiful finale. Oh my God, boom, boom. The orchestra was just pounding away, and the dancers are just dancing, and wow. And he was just finishing his shot. He had to have his shot. Or he said in Russian, he didn't speak much English. And those of us who could speak the language would understand him. He said, I just couldn't finish that thing without that. I just couldn't do it. He said. So it just kept going and going and going, and everything that I've ever wanted to do, I was able to do. And that was where I say to myself, thank you, my mother, for being so wise and guiding me and pushing me, literally pushing me into the right areas. Meeting James Whale, yes, to learn more about the theater. Getting directions to what was the best teachers to go to. How long to study before you make it. Don't try to be too early or not ready yet. I followed all those rules, and I made it all the way through. When I'd come home from a tour with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, no work. So I got some jobs at MGM making I made 3 films there. And it's interesting, there's another film, another place at the Republic Theater, and there was a film, and I can't remember the name of the film, but it was with Spike Jones and the City Slickers. And I had to do some kind of a dancer. I never even understood what to do, but I learned how to do it. So here was all those funny sounds that they made with Spike Jones. Maybe somebody knows who I'm talking about, I don't know. But it's just the name alone would tell you all these funny sounds that he had coming out of his orchestra and his band, and you dance to that. So there I had my experience of working in films. On an Island with You was one of the films I made. Nancy Goes to Rio with Jane Powell. On an Island with You was with Sid Sharif, a wonderful, and Esther Williams, the famous swimmer. Montaldo, Mamtamban, other actors. It's so fascinating, and just where I am right this moment in my own home here in Burbank, surrounded by lights and everything, doing this wonderful film with a wonderful crew here. it's so much like that. And the directors are saying, put this light onto that, move it over there. It's a very fascinating thing. I just thought, wow, this is really interesting. I thought I'd seen everything, but this is a whole new technique, film as well. So I did that. Then I went on, and I said, no, I was beginning to go with one particular girl, my wife now, Natalie. Natalie I met on a date here in the Santa Monica area because my stepfather, who only bought Buicks cars, saw an ad for just the kind of Buick he wanted, and practically knew a little ways. And at home he says, well, do you want to come with me to see this car? I said, oh, well, might as well, you know, what else to do? And when I went there were two girls, the daughter of the parents who owned the Buick, and here was this other girl, and I'd seen that face in the Santa Monica Outlook. She was an opera singer, a very good opera. She was with the San Francisco Opera, too. And here was this beautiful face, and here she was sitting on the couch. And I said, oh my God, I got to meet this girl and try to go from there. So then we had some dates. Then I had to go on tour again. And so we wrote letters, all these love letters, you know, and everything, and all the time. And I finally came back. We married while I was still performing. And interesting about this too, at the Greek Theater. Guess what performance it would be? Scheherazade. All the erotic things the men were doing with the girls. It's that part of the ballet. And here I just married my wife, and she was saying, now you be a good boy, you know, this type of thing. I said, oh, I can only be so good. They trained me to be not bad for a few minutes on the stage. Because you're supposed to be all caressing all the girls, because you come out of they let all the prisoners out in the ballet from the dungeons, because they got the keys from the chief eunuch, and gave him some drinks or whatever. And then comes this. Oh, one more thing, yes. I was able to do a part that I'd always wanted to do, and that's the principal dancer in Scheherazade. Except for one thing. You got to be sprayed all gold. It's called The Golden Slave. That's the name in the title. And so it had to be a place where they had a shower where you can get the thing off, you know. And so that was it. And so I was able to do that. I was an understudy to the director who was doing the part, Freddie Franklin, wonderful dancer. And I finally got to do it only two times. And that was one more goal reached. And we became married while I was still dancing here on a summer engagement at the Greek Theater. And so we were married in Santa Monica at the Catholic Church. I then said, I'm going to have to bow out sometime because I'm now married. So I finished the tour, and I bought a car back east because we were just coming off the tour in Canada. And I drove all the way back to LA and had this car and a wife, and that was going to be my wife forever. And here I am, and here she is, still in my home. But then I began to teach ballet. And I said, that's the thing that's going to keep the bread going on the table and that type of thing. My first place I taught was on Santa Monica at the Deauville Club, which was right on the beach. A wonderful place. Had up at the very top story, a big ballroom, and made into a ballet studio. So then I went to another studio and 2 or 3 others, and I stayed for a bunch of years. One place, one of the male dancers, her father was a strange man and problems. He didn't like his son dancing anywhere. He didn't want him to dance with my company. I had a company called Pacific Ballet Theater at that time. I was teaching. I had a ballet company. It was doing well. Santa Monica would sponsor us every year doing the Nutcracker Ballet at their big Santa Monica auditorium. He danced there. The father was getting more furious. And so one time he began to burn ballet studios down. He burnt my studio down in Westwood completely. I had to move to North Hollywood and find a place, and we found a place there. And that was my last main studio that I was teaching there for 20-some years. I was able to teach a young, very talented girl. Her name was Cynthia Gregory. She was I even danced with her in Nutcracker. She was only 14, 15 years old. I had to stretch like heck because she was kind of tall, and when you get up on the toe, and but anyway, we did. And she began she was it. She was going to make a career. I got her into the San Francisco Ballet, which was a very well-known company at the time. And then from there, I made arrangements for her to go to what they call at that time, and it's now called Ballet Theater, American Ballet Theater. She became principal of this big company, and I was so proud of her. Then there were others, Evelyn Cisneros. I got into the San Francisco Ballet. One of my students that I brought up that made it very well his name was Charles Maple. He lives now south of here and has his own ballet school. And he made it to, first I got him into the San Francisco San Francisco Ballet Company, and then from there into the American Ballet Theater. And he came along real well. He got into a very good soloist position for the Ballet Theater. My studio, North Hollywood, it's no longer there. Never was it the best. It was a mechanic shop at one time, and we made it all into an auto shop, that's what it was. Made it into a big studio, put in a new floor and everything. One time I had to stay there overnight 2 or 3 times, and at night, it was a wooden floor that we had put down, but just a plain wooden floor, and the heat would get in during the day and just make it hot, the floor. Then at night it would creak. And I had to stay there a couple of times, and it would sound like some burglar coming through there. We're going to be robbed. It could be creak, 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 creak. It's just like somebody walking through. So that was scary, but that didn't last too long. But I stayed at that studio until it was time that I knew that it was time to retire. My daughter is the 3rd generation. My mother, myself, and my daughter. She now has her own ballet studio and her own company, too, here in the Burbank area of California. And she's doing very well with her school, which is not very far from where we are in this home. And she has this company that she has performed, and she's a very good choreographer. She's very good. I remember when she was a little girl in my studio, my wife would hold her while I'm doing rehearsals, and she'd be watching. She was 6 years old, 7 years old. Then when we had a break or whirl too, she'd get up there and try and do a few things, but not like a little girl would do normally, to follow the beautiful ballet, doing her own choreography. I said, that's pretty darn good, what you're doing. I'm going to steal some of that, your movements. I said, where's that coming from? So she's had this very good ability to good choreography instead of just choreography. And I think that's what's made a very good ballet company for her. I'm Andrei Tremaine. I'm 96 years old, as I said. I've had an exciting life. I've had an adventurous life. The legend part, some people said you're a legend. Maybe I am. But remember now, that's some old stories, and some myth to it. Probably all works together. But I feel that I had a very exciting life, and I hope it's not been too boring for anybody that has been viewing this film, because it's been very worth it to me, and I want to thank my crew that are all around me here.